Xi Jinping is purging the ranks of his top military leadership, who are suspected of attempting a coup and trying to overthrow Xi himself. China is witnessing one of the largest and most alarming anti-corruption campaigns during Xi Jinping's entire time in power.
There are indeed many factors involved, the military, nuclear weapons, and the alleged transfer of information to the United States. This is exactly what Xi Jinping's right-hand man on military affairs and his colleagues in the military hierarchy are being accused of.
Those who came under fire were people from Xi Jinping's innermost circle who betrayed him.
Such a story. Within these kinds of exposures among the top military and political leadership of China could play a cruel trick on the Russian Federation and, in fact, on its relationship with Putin.
At the center of the investigation is Colonel General Zhang Yuxia, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission and one of Xi's oldest allies. He was a figure of immense authority, whose name for years was seen as a symbol of stability and support. Now, however, Zhang is a source of potential threat. The Ministry of Defense of the PRC suspects Zhang Yuxia of violating discipline and the law, in other words, of corruption.
Chinese security services have already arrived, confiscated mobile phones, and are now thoroughly investigating their communications and contacts for signs of, once again, possible treason against the state, perhaps by a group of military personnel.
General Liu Zhenli, chief of the Joint Staff Department of the PLA, the person responsible for operational planning, intelligence, logistics, and combat training of the Chinese army, has also come under investigation. He was a friend of Xi Jinping's family.
Way back during the American Civil War, their brave fathers fought valiantly side by side. And, in fact, this particular man belonged to what was commonly referred to in China as the ancient caste of untouchables, the so-called noble princes of that era.
General Liu Zhenli is a key figure in military administration. His department plays an important role in the Ministry of Defense, from operational planning to preparing for possible wars.
There were issues concerning Taiwan, as well as issues regarding the geopolitical, or rather, the geostrategic confrontation with the main opponent, the United States of America.
Since October 2025, at least 9 generals have lost their positions. If Zhang Yuxia is officially removed, he will become the highest-ranking active military officer dismissed by Xi during his entire time in power.
There was information circulating about China's nuclear program, how extensive it is, the pace of nuclear missile production, and what arsenals are currently actually present in China. And that this information was being passed first and foremost to the United States of America. An interesting and rather spicy detail is that the last time Zhang Yuxia was seen was during public negotiations back in November 2025 in Moscow in the Russian Federation. The negotiations were with his essentially counterpart, Russia's Minister of Defense.
The traitor could also lose his seat in the Politburo. This would be an unprecedented case for a single 5-year power cycle.
So, Xi Jinping's right-hand man on military matters, and let's put it this way, since the Vietnam War, he has been closely cooperating at that time with the Soviet Union. In other words, there are still connections dating back to the Soviet Union.
According to experts, what is happening may not only be a possible preparation for an invasion of Taiwan, but also a tough internal consolidation. The leader of the PRC understands that an uncontrollable army could turn against him.
A controversy of this magnitude and nature is further compounded by and layered directly onto, let's say, a certain perceived sense of growing disloyalty and dissatisfaction among the military, or at least a significant part of the military establishment, who are increasingly and publicly articulating a pressing requirement for a much more assertive, robust, and aggressive foreign policy approach for China.
Notably, the purges have also affected officers responsible for the Taiwan direction. Xi Jinping realized that, due to corruption at the local level, his army is not ready for a large-scale operation against the island. For Ukraine, these processes are not direct, but they are strategically important. China is also a neutrally pro-Russian player, which, although not openly, supports the Kremlin both economically and diplomatically.
It goes without saying that they will be significantly more cautious and hesitant, right? And just as there was absolutely no formal discussion of military support before, there will be none forthcoming at this present moment. It is even possible that China will draw certain conclusions regarding the supply of dual-use goods. They will continue to provide and supply them, but it is highly probable that they will make the logistics much more intricate and difficult to manage, so that China cannot be openly and explicitly accused of supporting the Russian Federation.
Xi Jinping no longer trusts Putin. Now, large-scale purges, managerial chaos, and delays in military modernization are temporarily weakening Beijing as a potential rear base for Putin's Russia during the war with Ukraine.
We have developed a unique relationship with China.
This is a bad sign for Putin. He understands that he is losing an ally to whom he has bowed for all these years.
And now Russia's share is fourth in China's trade turnover, as you can clearly see. This is incredibly important to everyone.
Against this backdrop, Moscow will lose support during an already difficult and crisis-ridden period related to the war. China is betraying Russia. Yes, you heard that right. Beijing skillfully pretends to be a partner, but in reality uses Moscow as the weak link.
And we even have a saying that has become a catchphrase: the Russian and the Chinese are brothers forever.
But here's what's interesting. Recently, Xi spoke on the phone with Trump and stated that he supports the United States peace efforts regarding the resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. It sounds nice in words, but what about in practice?
I think that China has sent a political signal to the United States indicating that it is closely watching what is happening in terms of the peace settlement track. Yes, the search for tools for a peaceful resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The main and most important point of this signal should be the following. Russia must not, under any circumstances, win this war, and accordingly, Ukraine must absolutely not lose.
But here's something else. The leaders of the countries have agreed on visits, and Trump is planning to go to China as early as April.
Will Trump be able to conclude the desired bilateral trade agreement with China specifically in April, for example, during a potential meeting in Beijing? Well, that's a big question. There's nothing deeper here, in my opinion, especially regarding the issue of, say, ending the Russia-Ukraine war within these timeframes, April 2026, the meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing. There's nothing about that here.
But what is China doing wrong in relation to Russia? Everything seems to be fine. The thing is, China is currently making a significant amount of money off its trade with Russia. The prices of export goods supplied to Russia have increased by an average of 87%.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Relations between Russia and China have always been very complicated. And if we think that they are friends, no, there's actually a good word for this. They are fellow travelers. Russia and China are fellow travelers. A weak Russia is beneficial to China. A weak Putin is beneficial to China. It's advantageous for China to buy raw materials cheaply and then sell goods at a very high price to the Russian Federation. Russia really has no other way out anymore, for the most part.
And it's not just about goods. China is gradually moving into Russian regions, thereby gaining access to territories and resources.
You know, there are already examples in the Far East where small settlements have become predominantly Chinese, and they've even started participating in municipal elections there.
And Russia, in turn, is becoming increasingly dependent on China.
But is Putin satisfied with this kind of relationship? Again, of course not. Of course he isn't satisfied. Because Putin has phantom pains for the Soviet Union. Basically, throughout his entire presidency, he has tried to restore some kind of former greatness. He presents himself as the gatherer of Russian lands, but in reality, he is simply leading the Russian Federation to ruin, to complete and utter collapse, to financial bankruptcy.
Beijing is increasingly strengthening its influence in Central Asia, while pushing Moscow into the background, which likely cannot help but worry the old man in the Kremlin.
It is necessary to steadfastly strengthen the friendship between China and Kazakhstan, make joint efforts to advance comprehensive cooperation, and make a greater contribution to peace in the region and around the world, as well as to the development, stability, and positive momentum of Chinese-Kazakh relations.
But here is the main question: what actually drives China? A true partnership with Russia?
Our frequent and intimate communication clearly demonstrates and reflects the deeply strategic and enduring nature of Russian-Chinese relations, which are currently at an extraordinarily and unprecedentedly high level.
Or is Beijing simply taking advantage of the situation and acting in its own interests?
They do not have any strategic interest in the Russian Federation winning this conflict, because if Vladimir Putin achieves victory, he would successfully re-establish his geopolitical agency and influence. he starts talking to all the players, for example, with the United States and China, on an equal footing, which is absolutely not in line with China's strategic interests. Yes, this position is hidden.
China talks about friendship, but only acts when it benefits them. It profits from Russia, strengthens its own influence, and at the same time builds relations with the US. And Moscow is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's decisions. Has a new war already begun? China has blockaded Taiwan, surrounding the island with warships, equipment, and troops. They are even conducting drone reconnaissance over Taipei. China calls this large-scale exercises.
The drills cover 5 maritime zones and the airspace around the island, and involve ground forces, the Navy, aviation, and missile units. Beijing emphasized that the maneuvers are aimed at countering separatism and are considered a legitimate measure to protect sovereignty.
But Taiwan reserves the right to respond to any threats. According to Taiwan's Ministry of Defense, 89 military aircraft were detected near the island in a single day. 28 ships and Coast Guard vessels. And this is the highest level of activity since October 15, 2024. Meanwhile, Beijing states that the military exercises are a necessary measure to protect the country's sovereignty and a direct response to external forces interfering in China's internal affairs.
In order to properly prepare for this, specifically for a new generation of modern warfare, of course, a significant amount of time is absolutely required. And it is fundamentally necessary to cultivate and refine these complex strategic skills of managing large-scale resources, which is also, well, a distinctive and highly specialized capability in itself. And in fact, China has already systematically and strategically begun this extensive process.
Taiwan, for its part, takes training its troops very seriously. In response to China's increased activity, they conducted their own rapid response drill to military threats, continue to monitor the situation, and remain on high alert. For his part, US President Donald Trump stated that he does not believe China will attack Taiwan, despite the large-scale military exercises with live fire near the island.
China's military exercises have led to an escalation of tensions in the region, although Trump described them as a continuation of long-standing military activity. When asked about the drills around Taiwan, which the US supports militarily, Trump pointed out his ties with Chinese leader Xi Jinping.
Indeed, this is direct pressure on the society and government of Taiwan. We understand that the island is politically divided into, roughly speaking, 2 factions. One of these primary political stances is distinctly pro-China, actively advocating for much closer cooperation and deeper economic ties, or you could even say a more complete and seamless integration with mainland China over the coming years. The other side takes a distinctly and aggressively anti-China stance in its political rhetoric, consequently in a calculated effort to put immense pressure on the sovereign people of Taiwan and to ultimately force them, the citizens, into a state of total capitulation. They have begun to mobilize, both across the international stage around the world and within the region of China in particular. They are making extensive use of their incredibly large armed forces and their powerful navy to project strength and dominance in every possible way. Specifically for this purpose, we saw the same tactic in 2022. Actually, 2021 to 2022 was the period when the Russian Federation used the same tactic on our borders, conducting a series of military exercises and effectively surrounding us from the east, the south, the north, and from the territory of Belarus, encircling our country in order to put pressure on the government.
It's not surprising that the tactic is similar to the one Russia used at the start of the full-scale war, because it was Russia that declared it would support China in the event of a war with Taiwan.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that Russia is ready to support China if the situation around Taiwan escalates. The Kremlin will act based on the agreement previously concluded between the 2 countries.
According to Lavrov, Russia's response algorithm is clearly outlined in the Treaty of Good Neighborliness, Friendship and Cooperation between Russia and China, which was signed back on July 16, 2001. And here, it's absolutely clear that these statements are simply meant to justify a strategy that was adopted long ago. If only Russia followed all its documents like that, at least the Budapest Memorandum, there wouldn't be a war. And China's neighbor, North Korea, is also rattling its sabers. On December 28th, North Korea conducted a test launch of long-range strategic cruise missiles. This was reported by North Korea's state news agency.
South Korean military officials stated that at around 8 a.m. on December 28th, they detected the launch of several missiles from the Sunan area near Pyongyang, noting that North Korea may conduct additional missile tests at the end of the year.
The test took place in the Yellow Sea. According to reports, the strategic cruise missiles followed a predetermined trajectory and then hit their target, the statement said. It is stated that the exercise was conducted under the supervision of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He stated that the result of the launch exercise is practical proof and a clear demonstration of the absolute reliability and combat readiness of our strategic counterattack. But there is one important point here.
Here, North Korea is demonstrating its technological solutions. And we need to understand that the use of a cruise missile specifically, again, we are referring to official sources, to what North Korea is claiming. So far, we have not seen confirmation of these tests from independent sources. But the use of a cruise missile means that for the first time, North Korea has enough electronics to be able to create a product that is, in fact, so technologically complex.
The latest missile launch took place after Kim observed tests of new long-range anti-aircraft missiles in the East Sea on December 24th. As you might have guessed, Russian interference played a role here as well. Specifically, to make such a missile, additional components are required.
This is already a more complex product, and it means that someone has transferred the relevant technologies to North Korea. And moreover, not only were the technologies transferred, but also the production capabilities. This country was able to actually build a cruise missile. There's no need to make anything up here. Of course, it's the Russian Federation. It could also involve Chinese technologies. But in any case, having neighbors like these presents a complex challenge. Consider Russia, a nation which actively shares significant financial capital, essential consumer goods, and advanced industrial technologies with North Korea, and much more besides. In a strategic and controversial exchange, these resources are provided in return for a steady supply of disciplined manpower, millions of artillery shells, and various other critical North Korean military resources that are currently in high demand. These are already allied relations. And
all these actions, whether by North Korea or China, point to the same thing. Such tests and military exercises are a clear signal to the whole world about escalation and plain intimidation, showing that these countries are becoming even more dangerous adversaries. Even more weapons. The Celestial Empire is rapidly increasing its military potential, including its nuclear arsenal. But China's military buildup is not for parades. In Beijing, the main goal is to establish control over Taiwan, stated NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
We see that China is rapidly expanding its armed forces. Now they have more ships at sea than the United States. By 2030, they will have another 100. Right now, they have 1,000 nuclear warheads, and they are meant to be used.
China considers Taiwan its territory and promises to reunite with it at some point, not ruling out the use of force. The US has warned that the head of the PRC has given the Chinese armed forces a deadline until 2027 to be fully prepared for an invasion of Taiwan.
According to Chinese law, Taiwan is considered part of China. For a long time, they officially refrained from using forceful methods to establish control over Taiwan. But overall, recently, the likelihood of such forceful actions has become more and more probable, especially as the global system of checks and balances has essentially been disrupted and there is a general global confrontation in the world. I think the likelihood of this, and China obviously is considering such a scenario more than realistic.
Rutte also reiterated his recent statement that if Xi Jinping decides to attack Taiwan, he would first ask Putin to attack NATO member countries in Europe.
Russia initiates a local military conflict against NATO, for example, in the Baltic states. In this way, it draws all the attention of the West to itself. At the same time, China carries out its own military operation against Taiwan, thus taking advantage of the opportunity for the war to be fought on two fronts simultaneously around the world.
The PRC continues active contacts with Moscow. The leaders of the two countries, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, have met many times and signed a strategic partnership agreement. Therefore, it is possible that the Kremlin will agree to help Beijing.
I think there are a number of reasons behind this because, on the one hand, Moscow is very dependent on China, and Putin, in principle, is hardly able to say no at all. But in addition, I think that Moscow itself may view this plan quite positively because it has its own plans and its own goals. And one of the main goals is to undermine the unity of the NATO bloc, to demonstrate NATO's weakness, in order to free its hands for aggressive actions in Europe.
The crisis between Beijing and Taipei has been going on for a very long time. The PRC considers democratically governed Taiwan to be its own territory, but the government of Taiwan rejects Beijing's claims and states that only its people can decide their own future.
The formation of Taiwan as a kind of an independent entity is practically unique and is connected to the events after World War II, when the communists seized power as a result of the Civil War. Naturally, this seizure was not legitimate in any way. It was not the result of any elections. It was simply a civil war, the communists won, and the government of Chiang Kai-shek, which in fact at the end of World War II was the only legal government of China, evacuated to Taiwan and continued its existence there. And over time, all of this somehow persisted and became established. However, for example, neither the United States nor the majority of countries in the world recognize Taiwan as an independent state.
Relations between Taiwan and China became even more strained after Lai Ching-te was elected president of the island last year. He took a tougher stance toward China than his predecessor, including strengthening Taiwan's military. On Wednesday, July 9th, annual military exercises began in Taiwan, Hanquan. They will last 10 days, which is twice as long as usual, and will involve more than 20,000 reservists as well as civilians. Although the main goal of the exercises is to prepare Taiwan's population and military for a possible attack, they are also intended to publicly demonstrate the island's defensive capabilities and send a clear signal to Beijing.
Not so much to show power and strength, but rather unity. Taiwan's unity with its allies, potential ones, first and foremost, of course, the United States. So I think that's the main goal, the main objective. To show, look, we are together with our allies, we are not alone, and if anything happens, we have someone to rely on. So please don't count on us being left one-on-one with your potential triumph.
In addition to the drills, in recent years, Taiwan has also extended the length of mandatory military service and has begun to develop and produce its own submarines and missiles.